an eerie symphony in the darkness. Ethan Cole pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows as he searched for anything worth salvaging. The old building groaned under the assault of the storm, but he couldn't go home empty-handed. Not when Lily needed new shoes for school. Just a few more minutes, he muttered to himself, thinking of his 8-year-old daughter safe at home with Mrs. Martinez next door. The guilt of leaving Lily in the evening gnawed at him, but sometimes a father had to do what was necessary to keep food on the table. Lightning flashed through the broken windows, illuminating piles of debris and forgotten machinery. Ethan's experienced eye caught sight of some copper wiring that might fetch a decent price. As he bent to examine it, thunder crashed overhead, and in the following silence, he heard something that made him freeze. A whimper, faint but unmistakably human. Ethan straightened up, his heart pounding. "Hello," he called out, sweeping his flashlight in a wide arc. "Is someone there?" Another sound, this time clearer, a muffled sob coming from deeper within the factory. Ethan hesitated only for a moment before heading toward it. Years of working odd jobs had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming that someone needed help. He picked his way carefully through the debris, his boots crunching on broken glass and rusted metal. The beam of his flashlight revealed graffiti-covered walls and water-damaged ceiling tiles hanging precariously overhead. The crying grew louder as he approached what must have been the factory's main floor. "I'm here to help," he called out, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "Where are you?" A sharp gasp echoed through the space, followed by the distinct sound of chains rattling. Ethan's blood ran cold. He rounded a massive concrete pillar and stopped dead in his tracks. There, huddled against the column, was a young woman in what had once been a beautiful white wedding dress. Now the gown was torn and dirty, its delicate lace stained with mud and what looked disturbingly like blood. Heavy chains wrapped around her arms and torso, securing her to the pillar. Her face was marked with bruises, but her eyes, when they met his, held a fierce determination despite her obvious terror. "Oh my God," Ethan breathed, immediately crouching down to her level. "What happened to you? Who did this?" The woman flinched away from his light, and he quickly lowered it. She was shivering, her lips blue from the cold. Up close, he could see she was probably in her late 20s, with elegant features that spoke of refined breeding despite her current state. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please help me." Ethan didn't waste time with more questions. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. "I'm Ethan Cole," he said softly, examining the chains. They were secured with a heavy padlock, but the links themselves looked old and rusty. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Charlotte," she managed to say. "Charlotte Whitmore." The name tickled something in Ethan's memory, but he pushed the thought aside. Right now, all that mattered was helping her. He remembered the crowbar in his backpack, the one he used for pulling apart old furniture and fixtures. "Hold still," he instructed, retrieving the tool. "I'm going to try to break these chains. They look pretty corroded. Might be able to snap them." Charlotte pressed herself against the pillar, trying to give him room to work. The chains rattled with her trembling, and Ethan could see angry red marks where they had rubbed her skin raw through the torn sleeves of her dress. He wedged the crowbar into a rusty link and began to apply pressure. The metal groaned in protest, but held. Adjusting his grip, Ethan threw his weight into it, his muscles straining with the effort. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. "Almost there," he grunted, feeling the link beginning to give. Charlotte watched him with desperate hope, her fingers clutching the edges of his jacket. The chain suddenly snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the empty factory. Charlotte gasped as the pressure around her chest eased. Ethan quickly moved to the other sections, breaking link after link until she was free. As the chains fell away, Charlotte slumped forward. Ethan caught her before she could hit the ground, supporting her trembling form. She felt so small and fragile in his arms, nothing like the wealthy heiress he was beginning to suspect she might be. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. Charlotte nodded, though her legs shook as she tried to get her feet under her. The once pristine wedding dress was heavy with rainwater and mud, making it difficult for her to move. Ethan kept a steadying hand on her elbow. "My car's not far," he said, glancing toward the factory entrance. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Get those injuries looked at." Charlotte's fingers suddenly dug into his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered urgently, "don't take me to a hospital. They'll find me there. Her voice broke, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan looked down at her terrified face, illuminated by his flashlight's beam. Those eyes, desperate but determined, pleaded for trust. In that moment, he knew he couldn't leave her to whatever fate she was running from. "Okay," he said softly. "No hospital, but you need help, and you're freezing. Let me at least get you somewhere warm and dry." Charlotte's grip on his arm loosened slightly, relief flooding her features. She managed a tiny nod, and Ethan carefully began guiding her through the debris-strewn factory floor. The chains clattered to the concrete floor as Ethan helped Charlotte to her feet. She swayed unsteadily, her wedding dress torn and muddied, dark bruises visible on her bare arm. Lightning flashed through the broken factory windows, making her flinch. "Easy now," Ethan said softly, supporting her weight. "Can you walk?" Charlotte nodded weakly, though her legs trembled with each step. Her elaborate hairstyle had come undone, wet strands of hair clinging to her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought no one would find me." They made their way slowly through the factory, Ethan's flashlight guiding their path between rusted machinery and debris. The storm raged outside, wind howling through gaps in the walls. Charlotte stumbled on her torn dress, and Ethan caught her before she could fall. "Almost there," he encouraged. "My truck's just outside." When they reached the factory entrance, the full force of the storm hit them. Rain poured in sheets, instantly soaking them both. Charlotte shivered violently in her thin dress as they hurried across the muddy lot to Ethan's old pickup truck. The passenger door creaked as Ethan opened it, helping Charlotte climb inside. The truck's interior smelled of sawdust and old leather, with a small cross hanging from the rearview mirror. He quickly shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders before rushing around to the driver's side. The engine coughed several times before finally turning over. Ethan cranked up the heater, though it barely worked. "I know it's not much," he said apologetically, "but it'll get us there." Charlotte huddled under his jacket, her teeth chattering. Where are we going?" "My place," Ethan replied, carefully navigating the truck through the flooded streets. "It's safe there. I've got a daughter waiting at home. She's with Mrs. Martinez, our neighbor." He glanced at Charlotte's bruised face. "We should get you to a hospital." "No!" Charlotte's voice cracked with panic. "No hospitals. Please. They'll find me there." "Who will find you?" Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. "My fiancé's men. I ran away. From my own wedding." She gave a bitter laugh that turned into a sob. "I couldn't go through with it, but they caught me before I could get away. Brought me here to teach me a lesson about disobedience." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Your fiancé did this to you?" "His security team, under his orders." Charlotte wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "The Whitmore family name had to be protected, you see. Can't have the rebellious daughter embarrassing everyone." Ethan nearly missed a turn, his head snapping toward her. "Whitmore? As in Richard Whitmore's daughter?" Charlotte nodded miserably. "Charlotte Whitmore? Though right now, I wish I were anyone else." The rest of the drive passed in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and the rumble of thunder. Ethan's mind raced. Everyone knew the Whitmore name. The family practically owned half the state. Their faces were always in the news, their names attached to buildings and charity galas. And now, here was Richard Whitmore's daughter, beaten and terrified, in his rusty old truck. They pulled up to a small, well-maintained house with warm light glowing from the windows. It wasn't much, just a simple two-bedroom home with peeling paint and flower boxes under the windows. But it was all Ethan could afford on his handyman's income. "Wait here," he told Charlotte, then ran through the rain to his front door. Mrs. Martinez, his elderly neighbor, met him with worried eyes. "Ethan, I was so concerned with this storm. Lily's been asking for you." "Thank you for watching her," he said quickly, pressing some crumpled bills into her hand despite her protests. After she left, he returned to help Charlotte from the truck. Inside, the house was modest but clean, with worn furniture and family photos on the walls. Charlotte stumbled to the couch, her wet dress leaving puddles on the floor. She looked completely out of place in the humble setting, like a broken princess in a workman's cottage. "I'll get you some dry clothes," Ethan said, turning toward his bedroom. "They'll be too big, but they're better than staying in that dress." "Thank you," Charlotte whispered, hugging herself. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Don't worry about that now, just rest." As Ethan turned away, movement caught his eye. His 8-year-old daughter Lily stood in her bedroom doorway, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Her big brown eyes took in the scene, her father, soaking wet, and the mysterious woman in the torn wedding dress. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice carried across the room. "Who is she?" Charlotte's head turned at the child's voice, and something in her expression softened. Despite her exhaustion and fear, she managed a gentle smile for the little girl. Before Ethan could answer, Charlotte's eyes rolled back, and she slumped sideways on the couch, unconscious from the ordeal she'd endured. Ethan rushed to check her pulse, steady, but weak. The storm continued to rage outside as he covered her with a blanket, his daughter watching silently from her doorway, and the night's strange events settled around them like a dream. Sunlight streamed through threadbare curtains as Charlotte stirred on the worn couch. The scratchy blanket Ethan had given her was pulled up to her chin, and the sweet aroma of pancakes filled the small house. Her body ached from the previous night's ordeal, but the peaceful morning sounds, spatula scraping against a pan, little feet padding across wooden floors, quiet humming, felt surreal after her nightmare in the factory. "Daddy, is she awake yet?" A child's voice whispered none too quietly from the kitchen. "Lily, honey, let her rest," Ethan's gentle voice replied. Charlotte sat up slowly, wincing at her sore muscles. She'd changed into borrowed clothes, an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants that had belonged to Ethan's late wife. The wedding dress lay crumpled in a corner, a reminder of everything she'd fled from. "Oh, she is awake!" Lily bounced into the living room, her brown curls dancing around her shoulders. She wore pink pajamas dotted with hearts, and her bright smile showed a missing front tooth. "Daddy's making his special pancakes. Do you like blueberries? We picked them ourselves last summer and froze them." Charlotte couldn't help but smile at the child's enthusiasm. "I love blueberries," she said, her voice still rough from crying. Ethan appeared in the doorway, spatula in hand, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Lily, give Miss Whitmore some space to wake up." He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his kind eyes showing concern. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Charlotte said softly, "and please, call me Charlotte." Lily edged closer to the couch. "Your pretty dress is all dirty, but Daddy says we can wash it. He's good at fixing things." "Lily," Ethan started, but Charlotte raised her hand. "It's okay," she said. "Actually, I'd love to talk with you both. You've been so kind, and I need to thank you properly." Ethan brought over a plate stacked with steaming blueberry pancakes, setting it on the coffee table. Lily immediately climbed onto the couch beside Charlotte, seemingly unafraid of the stranger in their home. "These smell wonderful," Charlotte said, accepting a fork from Ethan. The first bite melted in her mouth, perfectly fluffy, bursting with sweet berries. "Oh, they taste even better. Daddy makes the best breakfast," Lily declared proudly. "He says breakfast is the most important meal because it gives you strength for the whole day." Charlotte watched Ethan move around their small living room, gathering extra napkins, his movements careful and deliberate. Despite his worn clothes and humble surroundings, there was a quiet dignity about him that reminded her of what true strength looked like. "Lily," Charlotte said, setting down her fork, "I especially wanted to thank you for sharing your brave daddy with me last night. He helped me when I was very scared." Lily's eyes grew wide. "Were you lost?" "Daddy always finds lost things. Once, he even found my teddy bear when it fell behind the dryer." "Something like that," Charlotte said softly. She glanced at Ethan, who had settled into an armchair across from them. "Your daddy is a real hero." Lily nodded solemnly, then leaned in close to Charlotte's ear, her small hand cupped around her mouth as she whispered, but her child's whisper carried clearly. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The fork in Ethan's hand clattered against his plate. His face went pale, and he stared at his daughter with a mixture of shock and confusion. "Lily, what did you say?" Lily looked between the adults, suddenly uncertain. "Mommy told me in my dreams," she said someone from a big, fancy house was my daddy's. She scrunched up her face trying to remember. "Des Tiny?" Charlotte sat very still, her heart pounding. She looked at Ethan, whose expression had shifted from shock to something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or remembrance. "Sarah," he said quietly, naming his late wife. "She used to talk about a connection to a wealthy family, but she never explained. She'd say the timing wasn't right, that someday it would make sense." The morning sunlight caught the dust motes dancing between them, the moment suspended in golden silence. Lily, oblivious to the weight of her words, reached for another pancake. "Sometimes," she continued cheerfully, "Mommy visits in my dreams and tells me stories. She said angels would bring us together when the time was right." She turned to Charlotte with innocent certainty. "Are you an angel?" Charlotte felt tears welling up in her eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who needed help." Ethan watched as Lily wrapped her small arms around Charlotte in a spontaneous hug. His daughter's face pressed against the stranger's shoulder, complete trust in her embrace. Charlotte's eyes closed as she returned the hug, her hands gentle on Lily's back, and something in Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. The pancakes grew cold on their plates as the morning stretched on. The three of them caught in a moment that felt both impossible and somehow inevitable. Outside, birds sang in the oak tree that shaded their small house, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. But inside, time seemed to stand still as Ethan tried to make sense of his daughter's words and the mysterious woman who had stumbled into their lives. The small-town clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan sat in a hard plastic chair, watching the nurse tend to Charlotte's bruises. His calloused fingers played nervously with the thin stack of wrinkled bills in his pocket. The morning had been a whirlwind of pancakes, gentle conversations, and now this necessary but costly visit to get Charlotte checked out. The bruising isn't too severe, the nurse said, applying ointment to Charlotte's wrist where the chains had cut into her skin. But you'll need to keep these bandaged and clean. Charlotte's eyes met Ethan's from across the examination room. She'd insisted she was fine, but he wouldn't hear of it. Better safe than sorry, he'd said firmly, though she'd noticed how his hands had trembled slightly when he'd pulled out his wallet at the front desk. When the nurse left to get supplies, Charlotte spoke softly. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. I can pay." "No," he cut in, his voice gentle but firm. "Right now, you're just someone who needs help. That's all that matters." The nurse returned with gauze and medical tape, working efficiently to wrap Charlotte's wrists. Ethan counted out bills at the front desk afterward, his face trying to hide the worry as he handed over nearly all he had. Charlotte watched him from the waiting area, her heart aching at his selflessness. During the drive back, Charlotte broke their comfortable silence. "I used to dream about this, you know." She gestured at the modest town passing by outside the truck's window, the small shops, the community notice board covered in local events, children riding bikes on the sidewalk. "Dream about what?" Ethan adjusted the rearview mirror, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "This. Normal life, simple freedom." She touched her bandaged wrist gently. "My whole life has been about control. What to wear, who to talk to, who to marry. Even my charity work had to be done in secret." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Your family didn't approve of helping others? Father says charity makes people lazy." Charlotte's bitter laugh held years of frustration. "He never understood that I wanted to make a real difference, not just attend fancy fundraisers for tax write-offs." The truck rumbled past the town's small park, where a group of kids played basketball on a cracked court. Ethan seemed lost in thought, his mind drifting to conversations from years ago. "Sarah, my late wife," he began carefully. "She used to mention something about a wealthy family, said they wanted to control her past, keep things quiet." He glanced at Charlotte. "She never gave me details, but sometimes she'd wake up crying, worried they'd find her." Charlotte's breath caught. "What was her maiden name?" "Thompson, but she once told me that might not have been her real name." Ethan's voice grew quieter. "She said she'd changed it when she turned 18, right before she left home." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Charlotte's mind raced through possibilities, through whispered family secrets and hushed conversations she'd overheard over the years. "The Whitmores have a lot of secrets," she said finally, "and they'll do anything to keep them buried." They drove in thoughtful silence for several blocks, each processing the possibility of a connection they hadn't imagined existed. The sound of Ethan's old truck engine filled the space between them. Charlotte was about to ask more about Sarah when something caught her eye in the side mirror. A black SUV with tinted windows had turned onto their street, moving slower than the regular traffic. Her heart began to race. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "That vehicle behind us, I think it's Marcus's men." Ethan checked his mirrors calmly, careful not to make any sudden moves. The SUV maintained its distance, but stayed behind them, matching their speed exactly. Charlotte's hands began to shake. "They always drive black Escalades. That's how they found me last time I tried to leave." Her voice cracked with panic. "I can't go back, Ethan. I can't." "Hey," Ethan's steady voice cut through her rising fear. "Look at me, Charlotte." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I won't let them take you. Not now, not ever." The SUV edged closer, its dark presence looming in their mirrors like a shadow from Charlotte's nightmares. Her fingers gripped the door handle until her knuckles turned white, her breath coming in short gasps as memories of the factory threatened to overwhelm her. Ethan kept his speed steady, his exterior calm betraying none of the protective fury building inside him. He'd already failed to protect one woman he cared about. He wouldn't fail again. The weight of his last few dollars in his pocket seemed insignificant now, compared to the weight of Charlotte's trust in him. The black SUV continued its slow pursuit, a predator stalking its prey through the quiet streets of their small town. Charlotte's bandaged wrists seemed to throb with remembered pain as she watched it in the mirror, her newfound freedom feeling suddenly as fragile as morning frost. Thunder cracked overhead as rain pelted the small house's windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the living room into darkness. Lily's small gasp echoed in the sudden quiet. "It's okay, sweetheart," Ethan's calm voice carried through the darkness. "I know right where the candles are." The scratch of a match broke the darkness, and warm light bloomed as Ethan lit the first candle. He moved with practiced ease, lighting several more candles around the living room. The golden glow cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the modest space feel cozy rather than cramped. Charlotte sat curled up on the worn couch, her borrowed sweater and pants a far cry from her earlier wedding dress. Her bruises ached less now, thanks to the clinic visit, but her mind still raced with worry about the black SUV they'd spotted earlier. "Daddy," Lily spoke up, her voice small but determined. "We should pray. That's what Mommy always said we should do when we're scared." Ethan's movements stilled for a moment, and Charlotte caught the flash of pain that crossed his face before he masked it with a gentle smile. "You're right, Princess. That's exactly what Mommy would say." Lily scrambled off the couch and knelt by the coffee table, her hands clasped together. "Come on, Charlotte, you too." Charlotte hesitated, glancing at Ethan. Prayer wasn't something she was familiar with. The Whitmore family's religion had been money and power, nothing more. But there was something so pure in Lily's invitation that she found herself sliding off the couch to kneel beside the little girl. Ethan joined them, completing their small circle. The candlelight softened his weathered features, and Charlotte noticed how young he really was beneath the worry lines and tired eyes. "Dear God," Lily began, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you for keeping us safe in the storm. Please watch over Daddy and Charlotte and help the lights come back on soon. And thank you for bringing Charlotte to us. She needs a family just like we do." Charlotte felt her throat tighten at the simple words. Beside her, Ethan reached out and squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Amen," he said softly, and Charlotte whispered it too, surprised by the peace that settled over her like a warm blanket. Thunder rumbled again, but it seemed less threatening now. Ethan got up and gathered blankets from a nearby chest, distributing them among them. "Might as well get comfortable. Power usually takes a while to come back on during storms like this." Lily snuggled into her blanket, looking at her father expectantly. "Tell Charlotte about how you fix things for people, Daddy. Like Mrs. Henderson's roof." Ethan settled back against the couch, his smile tired but genuine. "Not much to tell, really. I do whatever work I can find. Carpentry, repairs, odd jobs. There's always something that needs fixing in a small town." "Daddy's really good at it," Lily proclaimed proudly. "He made my whole bedroom set." Charlotte looked at Ethan with new appreciation. "You did? That's incredible." "Had to," he said quietly, staring into the candle flame. After my wife passed, money was tight. Still, island. But Lily needed furniture, and I had the skills, so." He shrugged as if custom-making furniture was nothing special. "How long ago?" Charlotte asked gently. 3 years, Lily answered before Ethan could. "Mommy got really sick really fast, but she told me to be brave and help Daddy smile." Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he reached out to smooth Lily's hair. She was the brave one. Both of them were. Sarah never complained, not once. Even at the end, she was more worried about us than herself. The candlelight caught the gleam of tears in his eyes, though none fell. Charlotte felt her own eyes burning, moved by the quiet strength in this man who had rebuilt his world around his daughter's happiness. "It's not easy," he continued, his voice rough. "Working whatever jobs I can find, trying to give Lily everything she needs. Sometimes it feels impossible, but then this little angel here will say something her mother would have said, or smile just like Sarah used to, and somehow we keep going." Lily yawned and crawled into her father's lap, dragging her blanket with her. "We're okay, Daddy. Mommy said God always takes care of us." Charlotte watched as Ethan wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her close. The simple gesture held such tenderness that it made her heart ache. In all her years in the Whitmore mansion, she'd never witnessed such pure love. The storm continued outside, but inside the candlelit room, time seemed to slow. Lily's eyes grew heavy as Ethan hummed an old lullaby. Charlotte found herself drifting too, lulled by the peaceful atmosphere and emotional exhaustion of the day. "Here," Ethan whispered, carefully shifting Lily so she could lie on the couch. He tucked the blanket around her, then handed Charlotte another blanket from the chest. "You should try to rest too. It's been a long day." Charlotte accepted the blanket gratefully, settling into the armchair. Ethan took his place on the floor near Lily, protective even in rest. The candles burned low, casting soft shadows across their faces. As sleep began to claim her, Charlotte looked at father and daughter through heavy-lidded eyes. In less than 24 hours, these two strangers had shown her more kindness and love than she'd known in years. Despite the danger that lurked outside, despite the uncertainty of tomorrow, she felt safe here in this humble home, with its golden candlelight and gentle souls. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Lily's small hand reaching out in sleep to hold her father's, and Ethan's fingers curling protectively around his daughter's. In that moment, surrounded by candlelight and the sound of steady breathing, they were simply a family finding comfort in each other's presence, while the storm raged on outside their sanctuary. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Charlotte stood in front of Ethan's bedroom mirror, examining herself in Sarah's old clothes. The faded blue jeans and simple white t-shirt felt foreign against her skin, yet somehow more comfortable than any designer outfit she'd ever worn. She'd pulled her dark hair into a messy ponytail, and without makeup, she looked nothing like the polished heiress from magazine covers. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked from the doorway, his voice tinged with concern. "Maybe we should lay low for a few more days." Charlotte turned to face him, determination in her eyes. "I can't hide forever. Besides, I want to help with groceries. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Lily bounced excitedly by her father's side, wearing her favorite rainbow backpack. "Can Charlotte come with us to the store, Daddy, please?" Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "All right, but we need to be careful. Mrs. Peterson next door already agreed to watch you, sweetheart." "But Daddy," Lily started to protest. "No buts. Remember what we talked about? Sometimes being safe means doing things we don't like." Charlotte's heart squeezed at their interaction. The love between father and daughter was so natural, so different from her own cold upbringing. They drove into town in Ethan's old pickup truck, the engine coughing as they pulled into Wilson's General Store's parking lot. The small town of Cedar Grove was nothing like the bustling city Charlotte knew. Here, wooden storefronts lined the main street, and people walked unhurried along cracked sidewalks. Inside Wilson's, Charlotte marveled at the simple pleasure of pushing a shopping cart. She'd never done her own grocery shopping before. Servants had always handled such tasks. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she followed Ethan through the aisles. "What do you usually cook?" she asked, picking up a can of soup to examine the label. Ethan chuckled. "Nothing fancy. Lots of pasta, sandwiches, whatever stretches the budget." "Let me help with." "No," he cut her off gently. "You're not touching your accounts. That's how they'll track you." An elderly woman approached them, her curious eyes fixed on Charlotte. "Ethan Cole, aren't you going to introduce your friend?" Charlotte's heart raced, but Ethan remained calm. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Sarah's cousin, Carol. She's visiting for a few days." "Oh, how lovely," Mrs. Wilson beamed. "We don't get many visitors in Cedar Grove. You must join us for church on Sunday." As they continued shopping, more townspeople stopped to chat. Each interaction made Charlotte's pulse quicken, but she found herself warming to their genuine friendliness. No one was trying to curry favor or secure business deals. They simply wanted to welcome a stranger. Near the checkout counter, a small TV mounted on the wall played the local news. Charlotte was reaching for a candy bar when she heard her own name. Charlotte Whitmore, daughter of business mogul Richard Whitmore, disappeared 3 days ago from her own wedding ceremony. The Whitmore family is offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. The candy bar slipped from her fingers. On screen, her engagement photo smiled back at her perfectly coiffed hair, designer dress, vacant eyes. Several shoppers turned to stare at the TV, then at her. Mrs. Wilson gasped. "Oh, my word!" Ethan grabbed Charlotte's arm, abandoning their cart. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. Whispers rippled through the store as recognition dawned on faces. Charlotte's disguise wasn't enough to hide her distinctive features, now that people knew what to look for. "That's her!" someone shouted. "That's the missing heiress!" Phones appeared in hands. Cameras pointed their way. Charlotte's carefully constructed normalcy shattered like glass. Ethan pulled her through the gathering crowd, shielding her with his body. Outside, more people were stopping on the sidewalk, pointing and staring. The simple trip to the store had become a nightmare. They barely made it to the truck when the first news van screeched into the parking lot. Charlotte ducked down in the passenger seat as Ethan started the engine. Her hands trembled as she realized what this meant. Her brief taste of freedom was over. She'd endangered not just herself, but Ethan and Lily too. "I'm so sorry," she whispered as they sped away, tears blurring her vision. "I should have listened, should have stayed hidden." Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "This isn't your fault, but everything's different now. They know where you are." Through the rearview mirror, Charlotte watched more news vans turning onto Main Street. Her father's men wouldn't be far behind. The simple life she'd glimpsed, grocery shopping, friendly conversations, the warmth of Ethan's small family was slipping away like water through her fingers. Her identity was exposed. The quiet town of Cedar Grove would soon be swarming with reporters, private investigators, and worse, the men who had chained her in that factory. The conflict had shifted from a simple rescue to something far more dangerous. Survival. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he turned each lock on the front door. Click, click, click. The sound echoed through the quiet house like tiny gunshots. He double-checked the windows, pulling the curtains tight against the growing darkness outside. The news report from the store kept playing in his mind. Charlotte's face plastered across the screen, that massive reward hanging over their heads like a sword. "You don't have to protect me," Charlotte said softly from behind him. She stood in the middle of his modest living room, still wearing Sarah's old clothes, looking both out of place and somehow perfectly at home. "I can leave. I don't want to put you and Lily in danger." Ethan shook his head, his jaw set firm. "No, they'd find you in minutes out there alone." "I won't go back," Charlotte declared, her voice stronger now. "That house, that life, it's not a home. It's a prison. My father's perfect little puppet, engaged to a monster who thinks he can break my spirit." She hugged herself, fighting back tears. "I'd rather live in a cardboard box than go back to that." From the kitchen table, Lily's voice piped up. "What's 7 times 8? Charlotte wiped her eyes quickly and moved to sit beside the little girl. "Let's figure it out together." "What's 7 times 7? 49, Lily answered proudly. "So 7 times 8 would be 49 plus 7 more, 56. "That's exactly right." Charlotte's whole face lit up as she high-fived Lily. "You're so smart." Ethan watched them from across the room, something warm and dangerous unfurling in his chest. He'd been so focused on the threat Charlotte's presence posed, he hadn't noticed how naturally she fit into their little world. The way she helped Lily count on her fingers, her patient explanations, the genuine joy in her eyes at each small victory, it was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. "Daddy," Lily called out, "Charlotte knows fraction tricks. She made them into pizza slices in my notebook. Look." He moved closer, examining the carefully drawn circles in Lily's math homework. Each one was divided into neat sections, with pepperoni and mushrooms sketched in different portions. His daughter's usually dreaded math homework had become an art project, complete with word problems about pizza parties. That's really clever," he admitted, meeting Charlotte's eyes. She blushed slightly and shrugged. "Math was actually my favorite subject in school. Before father decided business, etiquette, and social graces were more important for a future trophy wife." The bitterness in her voice made his heart ache. Here was a woman who could have done anything, been anything, trapped in a gilded cage by her own family. As evening settled in, they shared a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Charlotte's first time eating from mismatched plates on a wobbly kitchen table. She seemed to savor every bite like it was gourmet cuisine. "Time for bed, kiddo," Ethan announced when Lily's head started nodding over her empty plate. "Can Charlotte read me a story?" Lily asked, suddenly wide awake. "Please?" Charlotte looked to Ethan for permission. He nodded, trying to ignore how domestic this all felt. How right. In Lily's room, Charlotte sat on the edge of the small bed, a worn copy of the Velveteen Rabbit in her hands. Her voice was gentle as she read, giving each character a slightly different tone. Lily snuggled under her butterfly-patterned comforter, completely enchanted. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you," Charlotte read, her voice softening. "When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching. The sight before him was painfully beautiful. His daughter's sleepy smile, Charlotte's elegant fingers turning the pages with such care, the warm circle of lamplight surrounding them both. It reminded him of evenings with Sarah, but the pain he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt something new, stirring, something that had been dormant for so long he'd almost forgotten its name. When Lily's eyes finally fluttered closed, Charlotte began to hum softly, an old lullaby Ethan recognized from his own childhood. The melody floated through the room like a gentle breeze, and he found himself holding his breath, afraid to break the spell. Charlotte tucked the blanket more securely around Lily's shoulders, brushing a strand of hair from the sleeping child's forehead with such tenderness that Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't the scared, bruised woman he'd rescued from the factory. This was someone else entirely. Someone strong and gentle and real. The lullaby faded to silence. Charlotte sat for a moment longer, just watching Lily sleep, and Ethan watched Charlotte. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, he could see the healing scratches on her arms, the fading bruise near her temple, marks of what she'd escaped. But he could also see the peace in her expression, the quiet joy of this simple moment. His heart, so carefully guarded since Sarah's death, stirred with feelings he'd thought were buried forever. It terrified him. It thrilled him. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing he should step back but wanting desperately to fly. The night air wrapped around Ethan's modest porch like a cool blanket. Crickets chirped their evening song, and the old wooden swing creaked softly as Charlotte settled beside him. Inside, Lily's gentle breathing could be heard through the screen door they'd left cracked open. "Thank you," Charlotte whispered, pulling her borrowed sweater tighter around her shoulders. "For everything." Ethan nodded, his hands clasped in his lap. The porch light cast shadows across his weathered face. "You're safe here, at least for now." Charlotte's fingers traced the fading bruises on her wrist where the chains had been. "I never thought I'd find kindness like this. In my world, everything comes with strings attached. Your father." Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "What made him push you into that marriage?" Charlotte's laugh was hollow. "Control. It's always about control with him. The Whitmore name means everything to him, more than his own daughter's happiness." She took a shaky breath. "James, my fiancé, he's from old money too. Perfect match on paper. Except, he's cruel. Cold. Like my father, he sees me as something to possess." Charlotte's voice cracked. "The night before the wedding, I overheard him on the phone. He was laughing about how he'd tamed the rebellious heiress." Her fingers twisted in the sweater. "That's when I knew I had to run." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No one deserves that kind of life. My mother used to say the same thing." Charlotte's eyes grew distant. "Before she disappeared, Father claimed she abandoned us. But now, I wonder if she just couldn't take it anymore." The swing creaked as Ethan shifted. "My Sarah. Before she passed, she'd sometimes talk about a wealthy family. Said they'd tried to control her past." He rubbed his calloused hands together. "She never gave me details, just that she'd chosen love over money, chosen us." Charlotte turned to him, her eyes wide. "When was this?" "About 9 years ago, right before Lily was born." Ethan's voice grew soft. "Sarah was different after that, worried. She'd check the locks twice at night, jump at strange cars driving by." 9 years. Charlotte's breath caught. "That's when my father's company expanded into this region. He was obsessed with buying up small businesses, old properties. Sarah worked at her family's hardware store back then," Ethan said slowly. "Her father refused to sell to some big corporation. The store went under mysteriously a few months later." Charlotte's hands began to shake. "My father's favorite tactic. When people won't sell willingly, he finds ways to force them out." The night seemed to grow colder as they sat in silence. Inside, Lily mumbled something in her sleep, innocent to the weight of the conversation outside. "Sarah kept a box," Ethan said finally. "Old letters, photos. She made me promise never to open it unless something happened to her." His voice roughened. "When she got sick, she tried to tell me something about it, but she was too weak by then." Charlotte hugged herself tighter. "My mother left a letter too. Father destroyed it before I could read it. Said it was full of lies." "Why would your father care about a small town like this?" Ethan wondered aloud. "About Sarah's family?" Charlotte's face paled in the dim light. Unless what? Unless Sarah knew something that could hurt him." Charlotte's voice trembled. "My father. He doesn't just destroy businesses, Ethan. He destroys people who stand in his way." The old swing fell still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, breaking the heavy silence. "You think—" Ethan's throat felt dry. "You think your family had something to do with Sarah?" Charlotte couldn't stop shaking now. "The timing, the pattern. It fits how my father operates." She pressed her hands to her mouth. "Oh God, what if?" A floorboard creaked inside the house, and they both jumped. But it was just Lily turning over in her sleep, her soft snores resuming moments later. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring out into the darkness. The pieces were there, scattered like the broken glass he'd found Charlotte among, cutting deep with their sharp edges of truth. "Sarah deserved better," he whispered. "She deserved to see Lily grow up." Charlotte touched his arm gently. "And you deserve to know the truth." The truth. Such a simple word for something so complicated. Ethan looked at Charlotte, seeing not the billionaire's daughter, but someone as trapped by the Whitmore legacy as his wife might have been. "Do you really think your father?" He couldn't finish the question. Charlotte's silence was answer enough. The night wrapped tighter around them, full of questions neither was ready to answer. The old church bell rang through the crisp Sunday morning air as Ethan's truck pulled into the gravel parking lot. Charlotte smoothed down the simple blue dress she'd borrowed, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to anything this modest or this real. "Don't worry," Lily chirped from the back seat, reaching forward to pat Charlotte's shoulder. "Everyone here is super nice. Right, Daddy?" Ethan nodded, but his eyes scanned the gathering crowd with concern. "Just stay close to us," he said softly. As they walked toward the white wooden church, Charlotte noticed the whispers and stares. Some folks quickly looked away, while others openly gaped. She heard fragments of their conversations. That missing heiress. And Ethan Cole, of all people. But then Mrs. Henderson, the elderly choir director, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome, dear. We're so glad to have you join us today." She wrapped Charlotte in a motherly hug that smelled of lavender and fresh-baked cookies. Inside, the church showed its age. Paint peeled in corners, and Charlotte noticed patches where rain had stained the ceiling. Yet there was something beautiful about the worn wooden pews and sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. They sat near the back, Lily between them. The little girl proudly showed Charlotte how to find the right hymn numbers in the dog-eared songbook. As the congregation sang, Charlotte was struck by the honest, imperfect voices joining together. It was nothing like the polished performances at her family's cathedral. Pastor Mike, a man with kind eyes and gray at his temples, stepped up to the pulpit. His sermon was simple but powerful, speaking about finding courage to face life's storms. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "God leads us to freedom through unexpected paths, and often the very things that seem like obstacles become our greatest blessings." Charlotte felt tears well up in her eyes. Lily slipped her small hand into Charlotte's and squeezed. On her other side, she could feel Ethan's steady presence, strong and reassuring. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and donuts. To Charlotte's surprise, most of the initial whispers turned to genuine welcomes. Mrs. Peterson brought her a cup of coffee, made exactly how she liked it, something Lily must have told her. Mr. Jenkins, the town handyman, shared stories about how Ethan had helped him repair the church's steps last winter. As they talked, Charlotte noticed water spots on the ceiling tiles. Pastor Mike caught her looking up and sighed. "The roof's been giving us trouble," he admitted. "We've been saving for repairs, but at this rate," he shrugged, trying to stay cheerful, "the Lord will provide." Later, as they walked to the truck, Charlotte touched Ethan's arm. "I want to help," she said quietly. "Charlotte." Ethan's face showed concern. "Please, I can arrange it anonymously through a charity foundation I work with. No one would know it came from me." Her eyes pleaded with him. "This community has shown me such kindness. Let me do this one thing." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then at the church, with its weathered cross reaching toward the sky. "It would mean a lot to everyone here," he finally said. "Then it's settled," Lily declared, making them both laugh. That evening, they worked together in Ethan's small kitchen. Charlotte had insisted on cooking, though she'd never made anything more complicated than toast before. Under Lily's expert guidance, they managed to create a meal of slightly crooked biscuits and chicken soup. "These are the best biscuits ever," Lily announced, even though they were a bit burnt on the bottom. "They're certainly unique," Ethan chuckled, but his eyes were warm as he watched Charlotte proudly serve another helping. The kitchen was a mess of flour and dirty dishes, but none of them seemed to care. Lily told jokes from her school lunch table that made no sense, but had them all laughing anyway. Charlotte felt something deep in her chest unlock, a kind of joy she'd never known in all her years of formal dinners and perfect table settings. "Tell the one about the penguin again," Ethan encouraged, and Lily launched into another story, complete with enthusiastic hand gestures that nearly knocked over her milk. Charlotte watched them both, this father and daughter who had opened their home and hearts to her. The evening light filtered through the window, turning everything golden. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free, not because she'd escaped her family's control, but because she'd found something real and precious. As they finished their meal, the sound of their laughter filled every corner of the small house. It wasn't just dinner, it was healing, it was hope. It was the sound of a family finding its way back to joy. Word spread through town like wildfire about the mysterious donation to fix the church roof. Miss Peterson, the The church secretary could hardly contain her excitement as she shared the news with everyone who would listen. The amount wasn't just enough for repairs. It would cover a complete renovation of the aging building. Ethan watched from his workshop as Charlotte sat at his worn kitchen table, carefully writing out plans for a fundraising event. Her long hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore one of his old flannel shirts over her borrowed dress. She looked more at home here than she ever had in the glossy magazine photos he'd seen of her at society events. "What about a harvest festival?" she suggested, looking up from her notes. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, mentioned the town used to have them years ago." Ethan set down his sandpaper. "Haven't had one since the mill closed. Too many folks struggled to make ends meet after that." Charlotte's eyes lit up with that determined spark he was coming to know well. "Then it's time to bring it back. We could have games for the kids, a bake sale, maybe even an auction of local crafts." Lily bounced in her chair. "Could I help make decorations, Daddy? Please?" "Course you can, sweetheart." Ethan couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. He'd seen that same look on her mother's face years ago. Over the next few days, Charlotte worked tirelessly, making calls and coordinating with town volunteers. She had a gift for bringing people together, Ethan noticed. She never mentioned her wealthy background, instead listening intently to everyone's stories and ideas. Mrs. Johnson offered her famous apple pies. Tom from the hardware store donated supplies for game booths. Even gruff old Mr. Peters volunteered his field for parking. "It's like watching the town wake up," Charlotte whispered to Ethan one evening as they watched volunteers hanging lights in the church parking lot. They just needed a reason to come together. The night of the fundraiser arrived crisp and clear. Strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed the church grounds, and the aroma of hot cider and fresh-baked goods filled the air. Children ran laughing between game booths, while parents chatted and caught up with neighbors they hadn't seen in months. Charlotte worked the crowd with natural grace, but not the practice kind she'd learned at society functions. This was different, genuine and warm. She helped serve pie, played ring toss with the kids, and listened to elderly Mrs. Wilson's stories about the town's history. Ethan found himself watching her throughout the evening. She'd tied colorful ribbons in her hair at Lily's insistence, and her cheeks were flushed with excitement. She looked beautiful, but it wasn't just that. She looked free. "Your young lady's quite something," Mr. Peters said, appearing beside Ethan. "Reminds me of your Sarah, same kind heart." Ethan's chest tightened at the mention of his late wife. "She's not my—" he started to protest, but Mr. Peters just chuckled and walked away. As the evening wound down, someone started playing old love songs on a portable speaker. Couples drifted toward the makeshift dance floor in front of the church steps. Charlotte stood at the edge, swaying slightly to the music. Ethan found himself walking toward her before he could think better of it. "Would you like to dance?" She looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd love to." He took her hand, trying to ignore how perfectly it fit in his. They moved slowly to the music, careful to leave proper space between them. But as the song continued, Charlotte gradually relaxed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing me what real life feels like, what it means to help people just because you can, not for recognition or power." She lifted her head to look at him. "I've never felt so useful, so valued for just being me." The lights twinkled above them, and distant laughter mixed with the music. For just this moment, Ethan could almost forget about the dangers lurking outside their small town, about Charlotte's family searching for her, or the mysteries surrounding their shared past. Right now, it was just them, swaying together under the stars. While Lily dozed on a nearby bench, it felt like peace, like home. Around them, the last of the festival goers gathered their belongings and said their goodnights. The autumn air had grown chilly, but neither Ethan nor Charlotte seemed eager to end their dance. In this moment, their world felt safe and full of possibility. The late summer evening wrapped around Ethan and Charlotte like a warm blanket as they walked home from the church fundraiser. Their footsteps echoed softly on the quiet small-town sidewalk, their hands linked naturally between them. The streetlights cast a gentle glow, making Charlotte's eyes sparkle whenever she glanced up at him. "I can't believe how many people showed up," Charlotte said, her voice soft with wonder. "Did you see Mrs. Jenkins crying when they announced the final total?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "That's what community means here. When someone needs help, everyone pitches in." He paused, looking at her with gentle eyes. "Though I suspect a certain someone did more than just pitch in." Charlotte ducked her head, but couldn't hide her smile. "I just helped a little. The town did the real work." She kicked a small pebble with her worn sneaker, borrowed from the neighbor since her designer shoes weren't exactly made for small-town life. "A little?" Ethan chuckled. "Charlotte, That anonymous donation covered half the roof repairs. Money isn't everything, she said firmly. What matters is how everyone came together. The bake sale, the raffle, even little Tommy selling his comic book collection. Her voice caught. I've never seen anything like it. They stopped at the corner where the maple trees lined the street. Charlotte turned to face Ethan, her expression serious in the lamplight. You know what tonight made me realize? What's that? Ethan's voice was gentle, encouraging. All my life, I've been searching for something. In my family's mansion, at charity galas, even in that awful engagement. She took a deep breath. But here, in this little town, with you and Lily, I finally found it. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. Found what? Home. The word came out barely above a whisper. This feels like home, Ethan. Not just a place to live, but somewhere my heart belongs. She gestured around them. The way people care about each other here, the way you take care of Lily, how everyone pulls together, it's everything I've ever wanted. Ethan stood very still, overwhelmed by the honesty in her words and the vulnerability in her eyes. His hand reached up, almost of its own accord, to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. Charlotte, I know it sounds crazy, she rushed on. We've only known each other a short time, and I came crashing into your life in the worst way possible. But being here, with you and Lily, it's the first time in my life I've felt truly free to be myself. The moonlight caught the tears shimmering in her eyes, and something in Ethan's chest broke open. All the walls he'd built around his heart since losing his wife crumbled in that moment. Without thinking, he pulled Charlotte closer, one hand cupping her cheek. Not crazy at all, he murmured. And then he was kissing her. The world seemed to stop, everything condensing to this single perfect moment. Charlotte's lips were soft against his, her hands clutching his shirt as she kissed him back. It felt like coming home, like finding a missing piece he hadn't known was lost. A giggle broke the spell. They pulled apart to find Lily standing on their front porch, still in her party dress from the fundraiser, grinning from ear to ear. She must have run ahead while they were walking slower. I knew it, she declared triumphantly. I just knew it. She bounced on her toes, pigtails bobbing with excitement. Does this mean you'll be my mommy, Charlotte? Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. Ethan started to stammer something about it being complicated, but Charlotte was already moving. She knelt down in front of Lily, taking the little girl's hands in hers. Oh, sweetheart, she said, voice thick with emotion. I would be so honored to be part of your family. Lily threw her arms around Charlotte's neck, and Ethan couldn't help but join them, wrapping both of them in his embrace. They stood there on the porch, holding each other and laughing through happy tears. Group hug, Lily declared, squeezing tighter. We're a real family now. Charlotte looked up at Ethan over Lily's head, her eyes shining with joy and something deeper. He smiled back, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. In that moment, all the struggles and pain of the past seemed worth it, leading them here to this perfect moment of connection. You know what this means? Lily pulled back, her face serious. We need to celebrate. Can we have ice cream? Charlotte laughed, wiping her eyes. Ice cream sounds perfect, even though it's past your bedtime? Ethan raised an eyebrow at his daughter. Especially because it's past my bedtime, Lily said with perfect 8-year-old logic. Special occasions need special rules. Their laughter echoed in the quiet night as they went inside, arms still around each other. The bonds of their newfound family sealed in joy and love. The simple moment felt more precious than any luxury Charlotte had ever known, more meaningful than any ceremony could have been. Here, in this modest house, with these two incredible people, she had found everything she never knew she was looking for. The morning sun barely peeked through Ethan's kitchen window when the rumble of engines shattered their peaceful breakfast. Lily had been giggling over her cereal, showing Charlotte how to make smiley faces with banana slices, when 3 black SUVs pulled up outside their modest home. Charlotte's spoon clattered against her bowl. No, she whispered, her face draining of color. They found us. Before Ethan could react, heavy footsteps thundered up his front porch. The door burst open with a crash that made Lily scream. Police officers flooded in, followed by men in expensive suits wielding briefcases like weapons. Charlotte Whitmore, one of the suits announced. Your father sent us to bring you home. 2 officers grabbed Ethan's arms, roughly spinning him around. The cold bite of handcuffs clicked around his wrists as Lily's terrified shriek pierced the air. Daddy, no, please don't hurt my daddy. Ethan Cole, an officer recited. You're under arrest for kidnapping Charlotte Whitmore and extortion of the Whitmore family. That's a lie. Charlotte tried to push through the wall of suits, but they held her back. He saved me. My fiancé's men had me chained up. Miss Whitmore, one of the lawyers cut in smoothly. Your father understands you've been through a traumatic experience. Mr. Cole here clearly took advantage of your vulnerable state. Ethan struggled to turn toward Lily, who was sobbing in the corner. Please, my daughter, she needs me. She doesn't have anyone else. A woman in a severe business suit stepped forward, clutching a tablet. Child Protective Services has been notified. Given the severity of your alleged crimes, Mr. Cole, we'll need to evaluate your fitness as a parent. No! Lily ran toward Ethan, but an officer caught her around the waist. Let me go, Daddy! Charlotte, help! Charlotte fought against the men restraining her, tears streaming down her face. Richard Whitmore is behind all of this. My father orchestrated my engagement, my captivity, everything. Ethan saved me. The lawyers exchanged knowing looks. As we suspected, Stockholm Syndrome, one murmured, making notes. Her father warned us she might defend her captor. They began dragging Charlotte toward the door. She twisted in their grip, her designer clothes from her old life now rumpled and tear-stained. Ethan, I'll fix this, I promise. Don't let them break you. Lily's sobs grew more hysterical as the CPS worker approached her. Now, sweetheart, we need to make sure you're safe while we sort this out. She's safe with me, Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. I'm all she has. Please don't take my little girl. But the officers were already pushing him toward the door. Through the window, he could see neighbors gathering on their porches, watching with shocked expressions as the scene unfolded. Mrs. Peterson, who had always watched Lily after school, covered her mouth in horror. Mr. Jenkins, who had praised Ethan's work at the church fundraiser just yesterday, now shook his head in disappointment. They shoved Ethan into the back of a police car. Through the window, he watched helplessly as Charlotte was escorted into one of the black SUVs, her face pressed against the tinted glass. Lily's screams echoed from inside the house, each one cutting deeper than any physical wound. The drive to the police station passed in a blur. Ethan's mind raced with images of Lily alone and terrified, of Charlotte being forced back into her gilded cage, of everything they built crumbling in mere minutes. The cell they put him in was cold and gray, with a thin mattress and a small window too high to see through. Your lawyer will be appointed tomorrow, the officer said flatly, closing the heavy door with a metallic clang. Alone in the silence, Ethan sank onto the hard bench. His hands shook as he covered his face, remembering how just hours ago they'd all been laughing over breakfast. How could joy turn to ashes so quickly? The words of judgment from the lawyers echoed in his head. Kidnapper, extortionist, unfit parent. Everything he'd worked so hard to build, his reputation, his home, his family, had been stripped away in moments. The town that had embraced them at the fundraiser would now see him as a criminal who preyed on a vulnerable heiress. But what crushed him most was knowing Lily was out there somewhere, probably crying for him. His little girl, who'd already lost her mother, now faced losing her father too. And Charlotte, sweet, brave Charlotte who'd finally found freedom, was being dragged back into the very nightmare she'd escaped. Ethan slid to his knees on the cold concrete floor. For the first time since his wife died, he felt truly broken. But even in his darkest moment, he remembered how Lily always insisted they pray together when things seemed impossible. His whispered words echoed off the cell walls. Please, God, protect my little girl. Keep her safe and brave. And Charlotte, his voice caught on a sob. Don't let them break her spirit. Don't let them lock away her light. Watch over them both until he couldn't finish. The words dissolved into quiet tears as the morning sun climbed higher outside his cell, casting harsh shadows through the tiny window. In just hours, his whole world had shattered, leaving him alone with nothing but desperate prayers and the echoing memory of his daughter's screams. The metal springs of the jail cot creaked as Ethan shifted his weight. The orange jumpsuit felt rough against his skin, a constant reminder of how far he'd fallen. Through the small window of his cell, evening shadows stretched across the concrete floor, marking another day without Lily, without Charlotte. Hey, Romeo, a gruff voice called from the cell next door. How's that billionaire princess treating you now? Laughter echoed through the cell block. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the taunts that had become a daily occurrence. The other inmates found endless amusement in his story, which had made the local news. Poor carpenter falls for rich girl, gets burned. They'd turned it into their favorite joke. His fingers traced the wooden cross hanging from his neck, the only personal item they'd let him keep. The past few days felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Mrs. Martinez, his elderly neighbor, was watching Lily, but for how long? The social services threat loomed large, each passing hour bringing them closer to possibly taking his daughter away. Should have known better than to mess with them rich folks, another inmate called out. They eat guys like us for breakfast. Ethan's public defender had been blunt. The Whitmore family's influence ran deep. They'd painted him as a calculating kidnapper who'd held their daughter for ransom. The evidence they'd fabricated seemed airtight. Security camera footage doctored to show him forcing Charlotte into his truck, bank records suggesting he'd been planning to demand money. He pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears. "Lord," he whispered, "protect them both." Miles away, in the Whitmore estate, Charlotte paced her room like a caged animal. The massive bedroom, with its crystal chandelier and silk curtains, felt more like a prison cell than ever before. Security cameras tracked her every move, and 2 guards stood outside her door. She paused at the window, pressing her hand against the bulletproof glass. The manicured gardens below seemed to mock her with their perfect order. Everything in her world had always been controlled, arranged, suffocating. "Miss Whitmore?" A quiet voice accompanied a soft knock. "Your father requests your presence in his study." Charlotte's stomach churned. She'd overheard the staff whispering about travel arrangements, about a private jet being prepared. Her father meant to send her away, probably to their estate in Switzerland, where she'd be even more isolated. She smoothed her designer dress, a costume she now despised, and followed the housekeeper through marble hallways. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Whitmores staring down with cold eyes. She'd never noticed before how none of them were smiling. Her father's study door stood open. Alexander Whitmore sat behind his massive desk, not bothering to look up as she entered. "Close the door," he commanded. Charlotte remained standing, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The bruises from her captivity had faded, but new ones marked her wrists where the police had grabbed her too roughly at Ethan's house. "Your adventure," her father spat the word, "has cost this family considerably. The board is questioning my leadership. Our stock has dropped 12 points. He finally looked up, his steel gray eyes cold. "You leave for Switzerland tomorrow morning. The staff has already packed your things." "I won't go." Charlotte's voice shook, but she held her ground. She thought of Ethan's quiet strength, of how he'd faced every hardship with dignity and faith. Alexander's laugh was bitter. "You don't have a choice. That criminal you've been consorting with will rot in jail. His daughter will end up in foster care, unless, of course, you cooperate." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. "You're threatening a child?" "I'm protecting this family's legacy." He turned back to his papers. "The car leaves at 6 a.m. Don't make this difficult." Charlotte walked out, her mind racing. In her room, she pulled out the expensive stationery she'd never cared for before. Her hands trembled as she began to write. "To whom it may concern, my name is Charlotte Whitmore, and I am not the victim of a kidnapping. I am the victim of a family that values power over love, control over truth." She poured everything onto the pages: her forced engagement, her escape, the brutal treatment by her ex-fiancé's men, her rescue by Ethan, and her father's corruption. She wrote about the joy she'd found in Ethan's humble home, about Lily's innocent love, about the mysterious connection to Ethan's late wife that suggested an even deeper family secret. A soft knock interrupted her writing. Maria, her favorite maid, entered with fresh towels. The older woman had been sneaking her extra food and kind words since her return. "Maria," Charlotte whispered, quickly folding the letters. "I need your help. Can you get these to the press? To every major newspaper?" Maria glanced nervously at the security camera in the corner, then pretended to adjust Charlotte's pillows. "The kitchen delivery door," she murmured. "No cameras. My son works for the city paper." Charlotte slipped the letters into Maria's apron pocket, along with the diamond bracelet. "For your son's college fund," she whispered. "Please hurry." Maria nodded almost imperceptibly and bustled out of the room. Charlotte watched the sun setting through her window, praying her words would reach the right people in time. She thought of Ethan in his cell, of Lily probably crying for her father, and felt strength flow through her veins. "Hold on," she whispered to them, though they couldn't hear. "Just hold on a little longer." The harsh fluorescent lights of the county jail flickered as Deputy Marshal approached Ethan's cell, keys jingling in his hand. "Cole, pack up. You're being released." Ethan looked up from his cot, dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights. "What?" "It's all over the news," the deputy said, swinging the cell door open. "That Whitmore woman, she wrote some letter. Changed everything." Ethan's heart pounded as he followed the deputy down the corridor. Other inmates pressed against their bars, some whistling, others calling out crude remarks. In the processing room, a small TV mounted in the corner caught his attention. The screen showed aerial footage of the sprawling Whitmore estate, now surrounded by news vans and reporters. "Sign here," the clerk said, sliding release papers across the desk. Ethan's hands trembled as he scribbled his signature. They returned his worn jeans, flannel shirt, and the simple silver cross necklace Lily had given him last Father's Day. Outside the jail, the afternoon sun felt strange on his face. His old truck sat in the parking lot where it had been left days ago. A sticky note on the windshield read, "Keys at front desk, Mrs. Henderson." His elderly neighbor had kept an eye on both his truck and Lily while he was locked up. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, his body heavy with exhaustion. He turned the key, and the radio crackled to life mid-broadcast. Breaking news from the Whitmore estate, where heiress Charlotte Whitmore has called an impromptu press conference following her explosive letter to multiple news outlets. Ethan pulled into the nearest diner, one of those small-town places where the coffee was always hot and the TV always on. The bell chimed as he entered, and several patrons turned to stare. He slid into a booth near the television, ignoring the whispers. "Coffee, hon?" the waitress asked, her eyes full of sympathy. "Please," he managed, his attention fixed on the screen. The camera showed Charlotte standing at a podium on the mansion's grand steps. She looked different now. Gone was the softness she'd shown in his home, replaced by steel in her spine. She wore an expensive suit, but Ethan noticed she'd kept the simple silver bracelet Lily had made her from craft store beads. "I stand before you today," Charlotte began, her voice clear and strong, "to tell the truth about my disappearance and supposed kidnapping." The reporters pressed closer, microphones thrust forward. Behind Charlotte, Ethan could see Richard Whitmore's face turning purple with rage, held back by his security team. "I was not kidnapped," Charlotte continued. "I fled my own wedding to escape a man who saw me as property, not a person. When I refused to play my part in their business, merger disguised as a marriage, my fiancé's men taught me a lesson by chaining me in an abandoned factory." Gasps rippled through the crowd. In the diner, conversation stopped as everyone turned to watch. "Ethan Cole did not kidnap me. He saved me." Charlotte's voice caught slightly. "He found me chained and hurt, and he showed me more kindness in a few days than I'd known in years of luxury." The waitress set down Ethan's coffee, squeezing his shoulder as she passed. "My father," Charlotte turned to face Richard Whitmore directly, "raised me to believe that worth came from wealth and power. But in Ethan's modest home, I learned that true worth lies in how we treat others. I watched him struggle to provide for his daughter, yet still help strangers in need. I saw real love in action." Richard Whitmore stormed forward, reaching for the microphone, but Charlotte stood her ground. "No, father, you won't silence me anymore." She pulled out a stack of papers. "I have evidence of my fiancé's men attacking me, of the threats made against Ethan's daughter, and of the corruption that has poisoned our family's legacy. I'm turning it all over to the authorities." The camera caught Richard Whitmore's face as it drained of color. Security guards began pushing reporters back as chaos erupted. "I choose love, not chains," Charlotte declared, her voice rising above the commotion. "I choose a life of meaning over a cage of luxury, and I choose to stand with the man who showed me what real strength looks like, not by wielding power, but by offering help to someone in need." Tears slid down Ethan's cheeks as he watched. The diner had gone completely silent. "Mr. Cole is innocent of all charges," Charlotte concluded, "and I am no longer my father's puppet or my fiancé's prize. I am simply Charlotte, choosing my own path for the first time." She stepped back from the podium as reporters shouted questions. The camera followed her walking down the mansion steps, past her father's grasping hands, through the sea of microphones and flashing cameras. She moved with purpose, like someone breaking free of invisible chains. Richard Whitmore grabbed for her arm, his face contorted with fury. "Charlotte, you will destroy everything." "No, father," she said clearly, the microphones catching every word. "I'm finally building something real." Charlotte strode to a waiting taxi, leaving behind the chaos of reporters, her father's shouts, and the crumbling facade of the Whitmore dynasty. The last shot showed her in the back seat, a small smile playing on her lips, the smile Ethan had come to know in quiet moments at his kitchen table. In the diner, someone started clapping. Others joined in, turning to face Ethan with newfound respect in their eyes. The waitress brought him a slice of pie, refusing payment. "On the house, honey," she said. "Looks like your guardian angel just grew wings." Ethan stared at the TV screen, now showing reporters analyzing Charlotte's statement. His coffee had grown cold, untouched. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Henderson. "Lily's safe. She saw the news. She's waiting for you." Another message followed immediately. "And she says to hurry home. She needs to make more friendship bracelets for her new mommy." The evening sun cast long shadows across Ethan's front porch as his neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, hurried Lily out the screen door. The little girl's eyes went wide, and she let out a cry that came straight from her heart. "Daddy!" Ethan dropped to his knees, his arms opening wide as Lily crashed into him. Her small body trembled against his chest, and he buried his face in her soft hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Tears streamed down both their faces as they clung to each other. "I was so scared," Lily whispered, her fingers gripping his worn shirt. "The mean people said they'd take me away." "Never," Ethan promised, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here now, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "That poor Charlotte did it. She showed them all what really happened. The whole town's been glued to their TVs since morning." Ethan lifted Lily into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist like she used to do when she was smaller. Even at 8, she felt so light, so precious. He carried her inside, nodding gratefully to Mrs. Peterson as she quietly excused herself. The house felt different now, emptier without Charlotte's presence, yet full of possibility. Lily wouldn't let go, so Ethan sat on the couch with her still in his lap. "Did you see Charlotte on TV?" he asked softly. Lily nodded against his chest. "She looked like a princess, Daddy, but sad. She told everyone you were her hero, just like you're my hero." A commotion outside drew their attention. Cars were pulling up along their quiet street, and voices filled the air. Ethan's heart jumped when he recognized Pastor Mike's booming voice calling his name. "Ethan, come on out, son. There's someone here to see you." Lily scrambled off his lap, tugging his hand. "Hurry, Daddy!" They stepped onto the porch, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The entire neighborhood seemed to have gathered on his front lawn. Old Mr. Jenkins from the hardware store, the Ladies' Aid Society with their casserole dishes, families from church, all smiling and parting to make way as a familiar figure walked through their midst. Charlotte looked different from the society princess on TV. She wore one of the simple dresses she'd borrowed during her stay, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were red from crying, but her smile blazed brighter than the setting sun as she caught sight of Ethan and Lily. "You're home!" Lily broke free from Ethan's grip and raced down the steps. Charlotte caught her in a spinning hug, laughing through her tears. "I am, sweetheart. I'm finally home." The crowd burst into applause and cheers. Mrs. Jenkins started singing Amazing Grace, and others joined in. Pastor Mike stepped forward, his hand raised for quiet. "Charlotte Whitmore showed us all what real courage looks like today," he announced. "And Ethan Cole demonstrated the kind of faith and compassion we all strive for. Let's welcome them both home properly." More cheers erupted. Someone had brought guitars, and soon hymns filled the warm evening air. The Ladies' Aid Society set up an impromptu potluck on card tables in the yard. Children played tag around the edges of the gathering, their laughter a sweet counterpoint to the music. Charlotte made her way through the crowd, accepting hugs and words of support, but her eyes never left Ethan. When she finally reached the porch steps, they both froze, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "I told them the truth," she said softly. "All of it. About the wedding I ran from, about Marcus's men hurting me, about finding real freedom here with you and Lily." Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "You could have been hurt. Your father can't control me anymore." Charlotte's chin lifted with the same quiet determination he'd first seen in the abandoned factory. "The press is investigating everything now. Marcus's violence, Daddy's business dealings, all of it. They can't hide in the shadows anymore." Lily tugged at both their hands. "Does this mean you're staying? Forever?" Charlotte knelt down to Lily's level, the way she had that first morning over pancakes. "If that's okay with you and your dad, yes, this is where I belong." "With us?" Lily's voice held such hope it made Ethan's heart ache. "With you," Charlotte confirmed. She stood, still holding Lily's hand, and faced Ethan. "If you'll have me." The setting sun painted everything in gold, making Charlotte's eyes shine like amber. Ethan remembered the terrified woman he'd found chained in that factory, how she'd transformed into someone strong enough to face down her powerful family for love. For them, he reached for her free hand, and she came into his arms as naturally as breathing. The crowd's cheers faded away as he held her close, feeling her trembling stop as she relaxed against him. Lily's small hand slipped into both of theirs, completing their circle. "Welcome home," Ethan whispered against Charlotte's hair, and felt her smile against his shoulder. Around them, the impromptu celebration continued as darkness fell. Fireflies began to dance in the yard, and someone strung up Christmas lights between the porch posts. The town that had once whispered about the mysterious woman in Ethan's house now celebrated her return as one of their own. Lily refused to leave their sides, keeping hold of their joined hands as neighbors brought food and blessings. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears at each simple kindness: a homemade pie, a handwritten card, a warm hug from a stranger who wasn't really a stranger anymore. I never knew it could be like this, she whispered to Ethan as they watched Lily show her friend Katie how to catch fireflies in a jar. Real family, real community. Ethan squeezed her hand. This is just the beginning. They stood together on the porch, Lily's small hand warm in theirs, watching their neighbors celebrate love's triumph over fear, truth's victory over lies, and the simple miracle of three broken hearts finding home in each other. The downtown courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Charlotte squeezed Ethan's hand as they made their way through the crowd. She wore a simple blue dress, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, looking more like the small-town woman she'd become than the wealthy heiress she'd been born. Inside the courtroom, the polished wooden benches creaked as people settled in. Charlotte's father, Richard Whitmore, sat rigidly in an expensive suit, his face a mask of cold disapproval. Next to him, Charlotte's ex-fiancé, James Barrett, glared at her with barely contained rage. Judge Martinez called the court to order, her gavel echoing through the hushed room. "Miss Whitmore, please take the stand." Charlotte walked forward, her steps steady despite her racing heart. After being sworn in, she faced the courtroom, her eyes finding Ethan's supportive gaze. "Miss Whitmore," her lawyer began, "please tell the court what happened the day of your wedding." Charlotte took a deep breath. "I couldn't go through with it. The marriage was arranged by my father. I never loved James. When I tried to leave, James's men grabbed me. They dragged me to that old factory." Her voice wavered but didn't break. "They chained me there like an animal. Said they were teaching me a lesson about obedience." The prosecutor presented photos of Charlotte's bruises from the clinic visit, making several jurors gasp. Then came security footage from the factory's exterior, showing James's men forcing a struggling figure in white through a side door. "And who found you there?" the lawyer asked. Charlotte's eyes softened. "Ethan Cole. He heard my cries for help and freed me. He risked everything to save a stranger." James's lawyer tried to spin the story during cross-examination. "Isn't it true that Mr. Cole orchestrated this entire incident to extort money from your family?" "Absolutely not," Charlotte replied firmly. "Ethan Cole is the most honest, selfless man I've ever met. He took me in when I had nowhere to go, protected me when my own family tried to cage me. He never asked for a single penny." When Ethan took the stand, his working man's clothes stood in stark contrast to the expensive suits around him, but he held himself with quiet dignity. "Mr. Cole," Charlotte's lawyer addressed him, "what were you doing at the factory that night?" "Gathering scrap wood to sell," Ethan answered simply. "I'm a single father. Times were tough, and I do what I can to provide for my daughter." "And you had no idea who Miss Whitmore was when you found her?" "No, sir. I just heard someone crying for help. Couldn't walk away from that." The evidence mounted throughout the day. Security camera footage from other angles, text messages between James and his men, discussing their lesson for Charlotte, financial records showing suspicious payments from James's accounts to the men identified in the footage. Richard Whitmore shifted uncomfortably as his own involvement unraveled. Emails revealed his knowledge of James's disciplinary plans for Charlotte. His attempt to use Ethan's custody of Lily as leverage came to light, drawing murmurs of disgust from the gallery. James grew increasingly agitated as his carefully constructed facade crumbled. When presented with the most damning evidence, an audio recording of him threatening Charlotte, he exploded. "She needed to learn her place," he shouted, jumping to his feet. "These common people have poisoned her mind." The judge's gavel cracked sharply. "Mr. Barrett, control yourself or I'll have you removed." Charlotte's father finally broke his silence, but his words only revealed the depth of his detachment. "Everything I did was to maintain our family's position. Charlotte has responsibilities to her class, to our legacy." The judge's expression grew stern as she listened to the final arguments. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of justice. "This court has heard overwhelming evidence of criminal conduct, manipulation, and abuse of power. Mr. Barrett, you will be referred for criminal prosecution for kidnapping and assault. Mr. Whitmore, while your actions may not have violated the letter of the law, they certainly violated its spirit." She turned to Charlotte. "Miss Whitmore, you are hereby granted full independence from your family's conservatorship. All charges against Miss Cole are dismissed with prejudice." She looked at Ethan. "Mr. Cole, this court commends your courage and integrity. You represent the best of human nature." The gavel fell one final time. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in movement and noise. James was led away by officers, his face twisted in fury. Richard Whitmore stalked out without looking at his daughter, his empire of control finally crumbling. Charlotte stood slowly, tears of relief streaming down her face. When she turned to Ethan, he was already there, his strong arms wrapping around her as cameras flashed and reporters called out questions. But in that moment, they were aware of only each other and the justice that had finally been served. "It's over," Charlotte whispered against his shoulder. Ethan held her tighter, his voice rough with emotion. "You're free now. Really free." They walked out of the courthouse together, no longer a rescued heiress and her savior, but equals united by love and vindicated by truth. On the steps outside, Lily waited with Mrs. Peterson, bouncing with excitement as she saw them emerge victorious. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope, its warm light falling on three people who had found family in the most unexpected way, their bond now strengthened by justice and truth. The autumn breeze carried the scent of sawdust and fresh paint through Main Street as Ethan and Charlotte walked hand in hand past the old Anderson building. What had once been a crumbling eyesore was now alive with activity. Workers climbed scaffolding, and the rhythmic sound of hammers echoed through the morning air. "I still can't believe how quickly everything's coming together," Ethan said, his eyes scanning the construction site with pride. The future youth center's framework was already taking shape, its bones reaching toward the clear blue sky. Charlotte leaned into him, her shoulder brushing against his. "You're the one who made it possible. You knew exactly what this town needed." "Me?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I just mentioned how the kids needed a safe place after school. You're the one who made it happen." "We made it happen together," Charlotte corrected him, stopping to watch a crane lift steel beams into place. She was dressed simply now, jeans and a warm sweater, so different from the society heiress she'd once been. The past months had changed her, softened her edges while strengthening her core. Mr. Jenkins, the site foreman, waved from across the street. "Morning, Mr. Cole. Miss Whitmore. The community room's framing will be done by Friday." "That's wonderful news," Charlotte called back, her face lighting up. She turned to Ethan, her eyes sparkling. "Remember when we first talked about this? How you said every kid deserves a chance to dream?" Ethan nodded, thinking back to those late-night conversations on his worn couch, when Charlotte was still healing from her ordeal, and they were discovering each other's hearts. "I just didn't expect those dreams to come true so fast." They continued their walk, passing Mrs. Miller's flower shop where fresh mums decorated the sidewalk display. The shopkeeper smiled warmly through the window. Gone were the suspicious glances that had once greeted Charlotte. She was one of them now, proven by actions rather than words. "I've been thinking," Charlotte said, slowing her pace. "The old library building on Cedar Street? It would make a perfect training center for single parents trying to get back into the workforce." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Always planning the next project, aren't you? Is that a bad thing?" She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "No," he said softly. "It's one of the things I love most about you, how you see possibilities everywhere." They stopped at the corner cafe, where Mike, the owner, was setting out the daily specials. The bell chimed as they stepped inside, and the warm aroma of coffee enveloped them. "The usual?" Mike asked, already reaching for 2 mugs. "Please." Ethan nodded, leading Charlotte to their favorite corner table, the one where they'd first started sketching out plans for the youth center on napkins. As they settled into their seats, Charlotte pulled out her tablet, opening a folder of community proposals. "I've been talking to some local business owners. They're willing to offer apprenticeships once the training center opens." Ethan watched her as she spoke, her hands moving animatedly. The wealthy woman who'd once been chained in an abandoned factory was gone, replaced by someone who wielded her resources like tools of healing rather than weapons of power. "You know," he said, interrupting her mid-sentence, "I think it's time we talked about making this partnership permanent." Charlotte's hands stilled on the tablet. "What do you mean?" Ethan reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. I love watching you light up when you talk about helping others. I love how Lily runs to you with every scraped knee and homework question. I love that you see the best in people, even after everything you've been through." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes as understanding dawned. "Ethan, I'm not offering you a mansion or a fancy life," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Just a simple house filled with love, a partner who'll support your dreams, and a little girl who already thinks you hang the moon. That's all I've ever wanted," Charlotte whispered, squeezing his hands. The cafe door burst open, and Lily rushed in, her backpack bouncing and her hands full of wildflowers. "Daddy, Charlotte, look what we picked at school." She skidded to a stop at their table, her eyes wide as she noticed their linked hands and Charlotte's tears. "Why are you crying? Are you sad?" Charlotte laughed, pulling Lily into a tight hug. "No, sweetie. These are happy tears. Your daddy just asked me to marry him." Lily's mouth dropped open. "Really?" She looked between them, bouncing on her toes. "Did you say yes?" Please say yes. Well, Charlotte pretended to think about it, making Lily squirm. I suppose I could get used to being called Mom. Lily's squeal of delight echoed through the cafe. Now I really have a mommy and daddy. She threw her arms around both of them, scattering wildflowers across the table. Golden sunlight painted the sky in warm hues as crowds gathered around the newly renovated youth center. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, strung between newly planted maple trees that lined the entrance. The old Anderson building, once a symbol of the town's decline, now stood proud with fresh paint and gleaming windows. Lily bounced on her toes near the ribbon stretched across the entrance, her blue dress matching the flowers tucked into her hair. "Daddy, look how many people came!" she exclaimed, tugging at Ethan's sleeve. He adjusted his tie, borrowed from Pastor Mike, and smiled at his daughter's excitement. Charlotte stood beside them, radiant in a simple sundress, her hand steady in Ethan's. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully curated image of the billionaire's daughter. Here, she was simply Charlotte, beloved by the town that had become her true home. Mayor Thompson stepped up to the microphone, set up on the front steps. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Tonight we celebrate more than just a building. We celebrate the power of community, of second chances, and of love that transforms lives." Ethan felt Charlotte's hand squeeze his as the mayor continued. "Most of you know the story. This project began with a stranger seeking shelter in our town. But Charlotte Whitmore isn't a stranger anymore. She's family. And along with Ethan Cole, who's shown us what true integrity looks like, they've given our children a future full of hope." The crowd applauded, and Lily waved to her friends from school who were gathered near the front. Several of them held signs that read "Thank you" in bright childish letters. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he cleared his throat, looking out at the familiar faces. These were the same people who'd watched him struggle after losing his wife, who'd slipped extra groceries into his bag at the store when money was tight, who'd helped watch Lily when he worked late. "A few months ago," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I was scrounging for scrap wood in an abandoned factory. I thought that was all I deserved. Leftovers and abandoned things." He paused, looking down at Charlotte and Lily. "But God had other plans. He showed me that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest challenges." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson, who'd watched Lily countless times, wiped tears from her eyes. "This sinner," Ethan continued, gesturing to the building behind him, "isn't just about giving our kids a place to play. It's about showing them that broken things can be made beautiful again. That love can rebuild what time and hardship tear down." Charlotte stepped forward next, her presence drawing all eyes. The townspeople had watched her transformation from a frightened runaway to a woman who radiated quiet strength and purpose. "When I first came here," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about names and bloodlines and social standing." She smiled at old Mr. Jenkins, who taught her how to make his famous apple pie, and at Sarah from the diner who'd given her her first job waiting tables. "But you showed me that real family is built on love, acceptance, and the courage to start over." Lily couldn't contain herself any longer. She darted forward to the microphone, standing on tiptoes to reach it. "And now I have the best family ever," she announced, causing laughter and applause to ripple through the crowd. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple but meaningful. Ethan, Charlotte, and Lily held the giant scissors together, their hands overlapping as they cut through the red ribbon. Cheers erupted as the doors opened, revealing the bright, welcoming space inside. Children rushed in first, exclaiming over the art room with its wall of windows, the library filled with new books, and the game room equipped with everything from chess sets to ping-pong tables. Parents followed more slowly, admiring the murals local artists had painted, scenes of hope and community that wrapped around the walls. As the celebration continued inside, with punch and cookies served on fold-out tables, Ethan found himself drawn to the quiet of the front steps. The paper lanterns had begun to glow as dusk settled in, casting warm circles of light along the path. Charlotte joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. "Just thinking about that night in the factory," he replied. "How scared I was of getting involved, of letting anyone new into our lives. And now, look at us," she said, watching through the windows as Lily showed her friends how to play foosball. "Sometimes the scariest choices lead to the most beautiful changes." The evening wound down gradually, families drifting home with promises to return for tomorrow's programs. The three of them stayed until the last guest left, turning off lights and locking up. Pastor Mike had insisted on handling the cleanup crew in the morning, shooing them home to rest. They walked slowly down Main Street, the paper lanterns lighting their way. Lily skipped ahead, then back, humming to herself. The summer air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine from Mrs. Peterson's garden. Charlotte's head rested against Ethan's shoulder as they walked, their steps falling naturally in sync. The quiet between them was comfortable, filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. As they passed the old factory at the edge of town, Ethan paused. The building stood dark against the star-filled sky, its broken windows and crumbling walls a stark contrast to the newly renovated youth center. "Sometimes miracles are found in abandoned places," he whispered to Charlotte, drawing her closer. She smiled up at him, understanding in her eyes. Their hands clasped tighter, fingers intertwined, as Lily danced ahead under the glowing lanterns. Together, they'd built something beautiful from their broken pieces. Not just a building, but a family, a home, a future filled with love. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.